The autumn of 1873 brought an early chill to the town of Cedar Ridge, nestled in the shadow of the Colorado Rockies. Sheriff Tom Mackenzie had just finished his evening rounds when he heard the sound that would haunt him for the rest of his days. It was the desperate crying of a child echoing through the quiet streets like a wounded animal's call. He turned from the door of his office to see a small figure stumbling toward him through the gathering dusk, her bare feet slapping against the wooden boardwalk with urgent, uneven steps. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her blonde hair matted with dirt and tears streaming down her freckled cheeks. Her simple cotton dress was torn at the hem and stained with what looked like mud, though in the dim light it was hard to tell. She ran straight to Mackenzie, grabbing onto his leather vest with small, trembling hands. "Please, Mr. Sheriff," she sobbed, her voice barely audible between gasps for air. "Please follow me home. Something terrible has happened. Please, you have to come now." Mackenzie knelt down to the child's level, his weathered hands gently steadying her shaking shoulders. In his 20 years of wearing the badge, first in Kansas and now in Colorado Territory, he had seen enough to know that when a child appeared in such distress, time was of the essence. "What's your name, little one?" he asked softly, trying to keep his voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. "Emma," she whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Emma Patterson. My mama and papa, they won't wake up. There was a man, a stranger, and he did something bad. Please, you have to help them." The sheriff's blood ran cold. The Patterson homestead was about 3 miles outside of town, a modest ranch where Jack Patterson raised cattle and his wife Mary tended to their small garden and their children. Mackenzie knew them well, good Christian folk who had never caused trouble for anyone. He had seen Jack just 2 days prior, selling beef to the local butcher and speaking proudly of his plans to expand his herd come spring. "Emma, where are your brothers?" Mackenzie asked, remembering that the Pattersons had 3 boys in addition to this little girl. "Where are Billy and Sam and little Joe?" The child's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Billy told me to run. He said to get help while he stayed with Mama and Papa. Sam and Joe, they're hiding in the root cellar like Papa always taught us to do when there's danger. But Billy, he wouldn't come with me. He said someone had to stay and watch over them." Mackenzie's heart sank. Billy was the eldest at barely 12 years old, far too young to handle whatever horror had befallen his family, but already showing the courage that ran in the Patterson bloodline. The sheriff quickly gathered his rifle, ammunition, and medical supplies, then helped Emma onto his horse Thunder, a sturdy bay mare that had carried him through countless dangerous situations. The ride to the Patterson ranch felt eternal, though it couldn't have taken more than 30 minutes. Emma clung to Mackenzie's back, occasionally giving him directions through her tears, though he knew the way by heart. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the prairie and making the familiar landscape look strange and ominous. As they crested the hill that looked down upon the Patterson property, Mackenzie's worst fears were confirmed. The small wooden house sat in unnatural darkness, with no warm glow from the windows that should have been welcoming them home. The barn door hung open, swaying slightly in the night breeze, and several of Patterson's cattle could be seen scattered across the far pasture, clearly spooked by something. Most disturbing of all was the complete silence that hung over the homestead like a burial shroud. Mackenzie dismounted carefully, helping Emma down before tying Thunder to a fence post far enough from the house to keep the horse safe, but close enough for a quick escape if necessary. "Emma," he said quietly, crouching down to meet her eyes once more, "I need you to stay right here with Thunder while I go look at the house. Can you do that for me?" The little girl nodded solemnly, though her lower lip trembled with the effort of being brave. "Will you find Billy? Will you help Mama and Papa wake up?" "I'm going to do everything I can," Mackenzie promised, though the heavy feeling in his chest told him he might not be able to keep that promise. He checked his rifle and walked slowly toward the house, every sense alert for danger. The front door stood slightly ajar, and even from several yards away he could smell something that made his stomach turn. It wasn't the metallic scent of blood he had expected, but something else, something chemical and wrong. Pushing the door open with the barrel of his rifle, Mackenzie stepped into the Patterson home. What he found there would stay with him until his dying day. Jack and Mary Patterson lay on their small sofa, appearing for all the world as though they were simply taking an afternoon nap. Their faces were peaceful, showing none of the violence or struggle he had prepared himself to see. Mary's hand rested gently on Jack's arm, and both of them seemed to be smiling slightly, as if sharing some pleasant dream. But they were not breathing, and their skin had taken on an unnatural pallor that spoke of death. On the small table beside them sat a bottle Mackenzie didn't recognize, along with 2 glasses that still held the remnants of some dark liquid. The chemical smell was stronger here, sweet and cloying, like almonds mixed with something medicinal. "Billy?" Mackenzie called out softly, not wanting to alarm the boy, but needing to find him quickly. "Billy Patterson, it's Sheriff Mackenzie. Your sister Emma brought me here to help." A small voice answered from the back bedroom, wavering but determined. "Sheriff Mackenzie, is that really you? Is Emma safe?" "She's safe, son. She's outside with my horse. Can you come out here?" Billy appeared in the doorway, and Mackenzie's heart nearly broke at the sight of him. The boy had clearly been crying, but he stood as tall as his 12-year-old frame would allow, trying to be the man of the house in this impossible situation. In his hands, he held his father's old hunting rifle, though it was nearly as big as he was. "I tried to wake them up," Billy said, his voice cracking. "When Emma and I came back from checking the chickens, we found them like this. There was a man here, a stranger. He was just leaving when we got back. He tipped his hat to us like nothing was wrong and rode away on a black horse." Mackenzie moved closer to examine the bottle on the table. Even without touching it, he recognized the distinctive smell now. Laudanum, the opiate tincture that doctors sometimes prescribe for severe pain, but in quantities far beyond what anyone should consume. Someone had deliberately poisoned Jack and Mary Patterson, making it look as though they had simply taken too much medicine and fallen into their final sleep. "Billy, did this stranger say anything to you? Can you describe what he looked like?" The boy wiped his eyes with his sleeve, clearly trying to remember every detail. He was tall, taller than Papa, had a black mustache and wore a fancy suit, not like the clothes men wear around here. His horse had silver on the saddle, real shiny, and he had strange eyes, sort of yellow like a cat's. When he tipped his hat, he said, "Evening, children. Your folks are resting now. They won't be troubled by their worries anymore." The words sent a chill down Mackenzie's spine. This had been no random act of violence or robbery gone wrong. This was something much more sinister, something planned and executed by someone who took pleasure in leaving behind witnesses who would remember his face and his words. "Billy, I need you to help me get Sam and Joe out of the root cellar, and then we're all going back to town. You and your sister and brothers are going to stay with Mrs. Henderson until we can figure out what happened here and make sure you're all safe." As they made their way to the root cellar behind the house, Mackenzie's mind raced with possibilities. Who would want to hurt the Patterson family and why? Jack had no enemies that the sheriff knew of, no debts or disputes that would lead to this kind of revenge. The family kept to themselves mostly, attended church regularly, and treated their neighbors with kindness and respect. The root cellar door was heavy wood, reinforced with iron bands, designed to protect the stored vegetables and preserved foods from both weather and animals. When Billy lifted it, 2 smaller faces peered out from the darkness below. Sam, who was 10, and little Joe, barely 6 years old, both looked terrified but unharmed. "Is the bad man gone?" Joe whispered, reaching up for Billy to help him climb out. "He's gone," Mackenzie assured them, though he made a mental note to organize a posse first thing in the morning to track this stranger with the yellow eyes and silver saddle. "You boys were very brave to hide like your papa taught you." Getting the 4 children back to town was a somber journey. Emma rode with Mackenzie again, while Billy walked alongside the horse, keeping his younger brothers close. The weight of their new reality was beginning to settle over them, and Mackenzie could see them stealing glances back toward the homestead, as if hoping their parents might suddenly appear in the doorway, waving them home. Mrs. Henderson, the widow who ran the boarding house, took the Patterson children in without hesitation, though Mackenzie could see the questions in her eyes. He promised to explain everything once the children were settled, and she busied herself with preparing hot soup and finding clean clothes for Emma, whose torn dress told its own story of desperate flight. It wasn't until the children were finally asleep, all 4 of them crowded into one room because they refused to be separated, that Mackenzie was able to sit down with Mrs. Henderson and Doc Williams, whom he had summoned to examine the bodies. It was definitely poisoned laudanum, Doc Williams confirmed, settling his considerable bulk into Mrs. Henderson's best chair. Enough to kill a horse, mixed into what looks like whiskey. They wouldn't have suffered, Tom. Whatever else that monster did, he didn't make them suffer. But why? Mrs. Henderson asked, dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. Jack and Mary never hurt anyone. They were good people, honest people. Mackenzie had been pondering the same question, and he thought he might have an answer, though it made him sick to consider it. I think someone wanted the children to find them, he said slowly. Think about it. If this stranger had wanted the whole family dead, he could have killed the children too when they came back from the chickens. Instead, he made sure they saw him leaving. He wanted witnesses. But witnesses to what? Doc Williams asked. What's the point of killing 2 people and leaving their children alive to identify you? Fear, Mackenzie replied grimly. Someone wanted to send a message to show what happens to people who cross them or get in their way. The question is, what did Jack Patterson know or do that signed his death warrant? Ma. The answer came 3 days later, when Mackenzie was going through Jack's personal effects, looking for any clue that might explain the murders. Hidden in a hollowed-out Bible, he found a letter that made everything clear. It was from a mining company back east, offering to buy Patterson's land for an enormous sum of money. The letter mentioned valuable mineral deposits that had been discovered in the area, deposits that could make whoever controlled the land incredibly wealthy. But there was a second letter, this one in Jack's own handwriting, addressed to the territorial governor. In it, Patterson detailed suspicious deaths of other ranchers in the area, all of whom had owned property that the mining company wanted to acquire. He accused the company of hiring killers to eliminate anyone who refused to sell, and he begged the governor to investigate before more innocent people died. The letter had never been sent. It was dated just 1 week before the Patterson murders, and Mackenzie realized with growing horror that someone had learned of Jack's intentions and decided to silence him permanently. The stranger with the yellow eyes wasn't just a random killer. He was an assassin hired by men who saw human lives as nothing more than obstacles to profit. Armed with this evidence, Mackenzie sent telegrams to the territorial capital and to federal marshals, requesting immediate assistance. He also quietly began investigating the other deaths Patterson had mentioned, deaths that had been dismissed as accidents or natural causes, but now took on a much more sinister cast. The Patterson children, meanwhile, were slowly beginning to heal under Mrs. Henderson's care. Billy had taken on the role of protector, rarely letting his siblings out of his sight and jumping at every unexpected sound. Emma had terrible nightmares that left her crying for her mother, while Sam and Joe seemed to age years in a matter of days, their childhood innocence forever shattered by that horrible night. It was Emma who provided the final piece of the puzzle. A week after the murders, she was sitting with Mackenzie on Mrs. Henderson's porch when a stranger rode into town. The moment she saw him, she grabbed the sheriff's arm with both hands, her face going pale as winter snow. "That's him," she whispered urgently. "That's the man who was at our house, the man with the yellow eyes." Mackenzie looked up to see a tall, well-dressed man dismounting from a black horse with silver tack, exactly as Billy had described. The man's eyes swept the street casually, and when they fell upon Mackenzie and Emma, he smiled coldly and touched the brim of his hat in mocking salute. But this time, Mackenzie was ready for him. Federal marshals had arrived that morning, along with a company of territorial militia. As the stranger walked toward the saloon, acting as though he had every right to be in Cedar Ridge, he found himself surrounded by armed men who had no intention of letting him escape justice. The man's name, they learned, was Marcus Kane, and he was indeed a professional killer employed by Eastern mining interests. Under interrogation, he confessed not only to the Patterson murders, but to at least 6 other killings across Colorado Territory, all of them ranchers who had refused to sell their land or who had threatened to expose the conspiracy. The trial, when it came, was swift and decisive. The testimony of the Patterson children, particularly Emma's brave account of that terrible night, moved the entire courtroom to tears. Even the judge, a stern man known for his composure, had to pause several times to collect himself as the little girl described finding her parents and running through the darkness to seek help. Kane was sentenced to hang, though he showed no remorse even as the noose was placed around his neck. His employers back east were arrested as well, their mining operation shut down and their assets seized to provide compensation for the families they had destroyed. The Patterson children eventually went to live with Mary's sister in Kansas, where they could start fresh away from the memories that haunted Cedar Ridge. Before they left, Emma asked Mackenzie to take her back to the homestead one last time. Standing in the doorway where she had found her parents, the little girl placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the sofa and whispered a goodbye that broke the sheriff's heart. "I told Mama and Papa that you caught the bad man," she said softly. "I told them they can rest now that he won't hurt anyone else." Mackenzie knelt beside her, this brave little girl who had run through the darkness to save others, even as her own world collapsed around her. "You did the right thing that night, Emma. You were braver than anyone should ever have to be, and you saved your brothers. Your parents would be so proud of you." "Oh, Dean," as the children's wagon disappeared over the hill toward their new life, Mackenzie stood alone in front of the abandoned Patterson house. The wind whistled through the empty rooms, carrying with it the echo of happier times when laughter and love had filled these walls. He thought about the evil that men could do in pursuit of money and power, and about the courage that could be found in the smallest and most innocent among them. The Patterson murders became legend in Colorado Territory, not for their brutality, but for the bravery of 4 children who survived the unthinkable and helped bring their parents' killer to justice. Emma's midnight run to the sheriff became the stuff of campfire stories, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found in unexpected places. Sheriff Mackenzie served Cedar Ridge for another 15 years before retiring to a small farm outside of town. He never married, never had children of his own, but he kept in touch with the Patterson siblings through letters and visits. Emma grew up to become a teacher, dedicated to helping other children who had faced trauma and loss. Billy became a lawman like Mackenzie, driven by his childhood experience to protect the innocent. Sam and Joe both became successful ranchers, living the life their parents had dreamed of for them. The abandoned Patterson homestead eventually fell to ruin, claimed by wind and weather and time. But the memory of that terrible night and the courage it revealed lived on, passed down through generations as a testament to the power of doing what's right, even when everything seems lost. In the end, it wasn't the evil of Marcus Kane that people remembered most, but the bravery of a little girl who ran through the darkness to save others, and the love that held a family together even in their darkest hour. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, Please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, justice, and the indomitable human spirit that tamed the frontier. In the comments below, tell us about a time when you or someone you know showed incredible bravery in the face of danger. What drives people to risk everything to help others? Share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going about the heroes, both big and small, who make our world a better place.